Hi, I'm Unzube Ufodike and welcome back to Slay Stories, where we center and celebrate diverse positive voices from and around the continent. Here at Slay Stories, we shine a spotlight on individuals and initiatives that are championing diversity in their own unique way while slaying in the lane. Today's episode is on diversity, equality, and inclusion, and we have two amazing guests. Our first guest is Emma Palmer, who is the founder and CEO of Culture and Connect. She has years of experience as a diversity and inclusion specialist, hails from London, and will tell us a little bit more. So, welcome, Emma, to the show.
It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. Your background is super impressive, and I just wanted to say, I know you're super passionate about diversity and inclusion. And given what's happened in the last year around George Floyd and the greater emphasis that's taking place on diversity, equality, and inclusion initiatives, it would be good to get a sense from your perspective where you think things are with respect to the diversity, equality, and inclusion agenda, please.
Yeah, sure. As you said, last year's events were really tragic. For a number of reasons, but I think what it's done is it's sparked a conversation globally, which is fantastic. But people that are from marginalised groups have always been saying the narratives that we're hearing now. If we talk about race and racism, we've been banging that drum for many years, for decades. But it just feels like now people are starting to wake up. People that may have never had this conversation are now starting to find themselves in spaces where they have to realise their privileges, realise where their place is in the world and what they can do to make a difference. So I think over the last 12 months, we've seen a bit of a shift in the world of diversity and inclusion, specifically in the workplace. Organisations are now realising that this isn't just a nice thing to do. It's fundamental to the growth of their organisation and making sure that people feel safe and celebrated and seen. But we're also starting to see organisations who haven't been doing the work, who've probably just left it and, never really focused on it. We're now starting to see them come out of the woodwork and recruit better teams within their organisations.
Yeah. There are two themes you touched on I was hoping to expand on a little bit more. An amazing summary of what's happened in the last year. You talked about privilege, right? People acknowledging their privilege. It'd be good to unpack that a little bit more. And also you talked about companies seeing this as more than a nice to have. So it'd be good to understand a bit more around how diversity adds value beyond it just being the right thing to do for companies.
We know that diversity and inclusion increases performance in organisations. So we know that organisations that invest in diversity and inclusion and do the right thing, we know that people perform better. If people feel like they can be themselves in the workplace, people just are better and they form better relationships and they come to work being their authentic selves. We know that to be the case. I think where things are now shifting is we've moved beyond the rainbow flag. We've moved beyond brands just putting rainbows on their marketing campaigns. We've moved beyond that.
The blackout boxes.
We're now
on
starting to
social
have
media.
those real conversations, which requires people to do the work. So when we're talking about privilege, we're talking about people really sitting back and reflecting on where they are in the world, on what their values and beliefs are, and how they can use their platform to amplify more marginalised voices. If we're looking at representation in the workplace, we're still seeing those snowy white peaks. We're still seeing, there's an underrepresentation at leadership level in organisations. So we want people to realise that and to look at themselves and understand their own privileges and their own biases as well.
I know Lady Phil from UK Blackout likes to describe it as the Guinness effect, white at the top and black at the bottom. And one final question. in your view, what are the other things people should be focusing on when it comes to diversity and inclusion?
I think for me, one of my real passions is intersectionality and how people can start applying that thinking to the work that they're doing.
Yeah.
So we know that intersectionality is the theory that looks at overlapping and intersecting identities, social identities, so race, class, gender.
It was an American lady that came up with that concept, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, Kimberly Crenshaw.
Oh, cool, yeah. Kimberly
she,
Crenshaw, yeah.
She's an American lawyer, and she's also a civil rights advocate. So when she coined this phrase in the 80s or late 80s, it was a legal term, and I think people didn't really understand what it means.
Yeah.
And over the last few years, lots of workplaces are now starting to think in intersectional ways because it relates to power structures and it relates to systems of oppression and discrimination because we're all more than one thing.
Absolutely. You know? I remember then the legal situation around that issue was an African American lady who was trying to sue for discrimination in the workplace, but she couldn't talk about discrimination as a black person because black males in her factory were getting promoted, and she couldn't talk about discrimination as a female because white women were getting promoted. However, with that intersection of race and gender, the black women that worked in that particular factory were overlooked many a time. So it's quite an interesting concept to keep in mind. So thank you for bringing that up. Still with us is Emma Palmer, founder, CEO of Culture and Connect. And we have a new guest, Simon Vandy, founder, CEO, investment banking executive, all-round mentor, awesomeness in the city, with us for this segment. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Zubi. Great to be here.
Thank you for joining us. And we had an amazing conversation earlier on diversity and inclusion, and I know that topic of intersectionality was something you wanted to address as well. I don't know if you want to make a quick statement on that.
No, I just would say it's quite a very interesting topic, and I had a chat earlier with Emma. And from my perspective, with the work that I do, there are 4 things I always focus on in order to ensure that I take that into consideration. So I always check my privilege. So who am I? What privilege do I have, and what are the people around me and what they've done to ensure that I literally speak at the level and I don't stand out of place, and I take into consideration other people and listen. So I try to listen to everybody, what they say, what they do, what they're telling me, and what are they comparison to people around myself. And I make space. So if I believe I'm not the best person to talk on a particular issue, I find somebody who is the best person so that I don't sound out of place, and I ensure that I don't say something that might literally kick somebody out of the space. And then the last thing which I do is also I try to nominate people who are positive ambassadors within their own space to ensure that there is a proportional representative in everything that I do.
Amazing. So you check your privilege, know who you are, you listen, you make space, and you nominate ambassadors and people to take things forward. Amazing. And I know you've also, I know you don't like to talk about this, but you've mentored so many people. You've mentored hundreds of people across London and abroad. So how do you make that allocation for those individuals? And what have you learned from that experience?
Wow. Well, I think the first thing is that people have always performed at things they're very passionate about. And I've always been a mentor right from birth. So everything I do, even the businesses I formed them because as a result of actually communicating with people and thinking about how can I make a difference. And so wherever I go, it's almost impossible because I actually never actually make friends because my friends become my mentees. So it's yeah, exactly. So I've traveled all around the world, and I pick up about maybe 2 or 3 mentees and everywhere I go, and I have about conversations, maybe about 20 or 30 conversations in a day. I set aside about 2 hours where I call people around the world. They can call me, they can speak to them about topics they have. I help them, I invest in them, and I also open doors for them.
Amazing. So mentorship, sponsorship, I know that's another big area when it comes to diversity, equality and inclusion. And that difference, is that something you want to jump in and talk about, Emma?
Yeah, I think your background's really interesting. I think mentoring is so important, and you know, when you've got people coming through maybe the same industry or the same sector, you can then impart your knowledge and your experience onto them, and then they can go off out into the world and do amazing things. I mentor as well, and it's just so nice to give back almost, but I also learn a lot from the people I mentor too. It's not about me, it's not about what I can give them. They're doing the work. I'm just there to guide and facilitate conversations, but ultimately, you know, that individual is doing it and grafting. So for me, I think mentoring is such a great way of giving back, but in a formalised and structured way. And that can take the form of just having a conversation. It could be, as you said, investing in a business, and just platforming someone's ideas. So yeah, I think mentoring for me is a huge part of what I do. And with diversity and inclusion as well, holding space for people to share their experience with you, and also representation. You know, I mentor people that I guess see themselves reflected in some way, whether they're LGBT or of colour. So that, I think, is incredibly important as well.
Yeah, seeing themselves represented, that visibility. We've heard the saying, you can't be what you can't see.
Exactly.
So what both of you have done with respect to mentoring individuals is super inspiring, having so many people you've nurtured and shown through your own individual success that it's possible for them to aspire and to do more. So thank you for that. Please stay with us and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Slay Stories. Still with us in the studios, you've got Simon Vandy and Emma Palmer. Next question to you, Simon, is around perhaps some case studies. If you're able to share a little bit about how DE&I, or what type of DE&I initiatives, do better, or maybe others that don't do as well in your experience within the corporate space and within communities.
Oh my God, I think it's, you see, the whole thing is a learning process, because I had my issues while I was growing up as well. And I found it extremely difficult to identify with myself. And for a very long time, so my name is Simon Bukari Vandy, for instance, so Bukari is my African name. And I would never use that name because of the fact that I was teased about it. And what happened as I grew up is that I moved from being mostly with white friends to then being with black friends and then being with both. And I realized that one of the biggest things that I should do whatever it is I do, is that remember that diversity and inclusion means creating a balance. So one of the things I try not to do is just create a team where it's just mainly blacks. And the reason why that is by doing that, you give a different message to the other group, right? So you need to ensure that the other team are part of the process and can grow from the process and change their visibility. It's about changing the narrative of everything that you do. So wherever I work, I call it the Rainbow Nation. So black, white, Chinese, gay, straight, disabled, it doesn't matter what it is. It's about I'm being very, very inclusive. And with all the companies I form, whether it's a VC, whether it's a consultancy, I ensure that I have at least one female board member, one gay board member, and a disabled person. So I try and include as much as possible. And as a result, people see a reflection of themselves in the companies I work for, or the companies I create. And so I become a very positive ambassador of the person that I am and the person I want to become. And the people who aspire to me, or the person that people that I aspire to become, we create this open network of a balanced society. And I think for me, that's the approach in everything that you do.
Yeah, so working with allies, right? And that
Yeah,
allyship,
allies are so
including,
important.
yeah,
And it's about that creating a culture of belonging. So we talk about diversity, we talk about inclusion, but we don't really talk about belonging. And if you're creating that space where everyone feels like they can participate, everyone has a voice, that is where you create that culture of belonging, and diversity and inclusion doesn't just become a tick box exercise. It's a part of the very fabric of your organisation, and everyone thrives really. But you know, you're right, allies are so important. We can't really do this work without allies. And that's where privilege comes in, because if you're an ally to a particular group, it's important not to speak for or speak over.
Exactly. Yes.
And standing in solidarity with the group is much more important than speaking for a particular group. You know, I like to think of myself as an ally to the trans community. I would never speak for the trans community, but I will always advocate for trans rights, and I will always challenge transphobia away from, you know, the cameras or away from where I'm seen. It's about doing it behind closed doors and not always doing it because, you know, you think someone's around and that they're going to hear you. It's about just doing the work without thinking about it sometimes. There's lots of performative allyship, you know, on social media, posting the black squares or, you know, plastering a rainbow over something when actually we should be allies behind closed doors.
Absolutely.
As well.
And I think the George Floyd situation has allowed us to see what can happen on a much larger scale. So you see names of streets changing, you see the police departments changing their policies and approach to things. You see TV, you see many now, it's a diverse TV, and you see shows like even Little Britain, you know, I read that they are trying to change the concept and not focusing on black or Asian, but trying to show positive aspects of it. So in that sense, they're being allies. It's about working together with bridge makers and ensuring that, you know, a collective approach of change is introduced.
I do think, though, there is a difference between segregationist spaces and subversive spaces. So if we take UK Black Pride, for example, that is a space for black and brown queer people, right? And it's a safe space. And the reason why that was created was because there wasn't a space like it.
I agree.
So I think there are times when it's necessary for your particular community. Because if you walk into a space and you don't feel welcome, sometimes that's down to the people, the way that they treat you, and the way the environment's set up. You know, I've been to London Pride and I haven't felt welcome. I've been to UK Black Pride and I feel at home.
There are two areas I wanted us to just dissect a little bit. I hear you, Emma, when you talk about how the main Pride isn't so inclusive. I've been going to the main Pride for many years, and now I actually just go to Black Pride, which seems a lot more wholesome, inclusive. You have all abilities, races, genders, greater representation. How did Pride become so undiverse and Black Pride become the Pride?
I think it's, you know, there's a whole history there that, you know, we'd probably be here for another 5 hours just dissecting that alone. I think ultimately, you know, London Pride has become so commercialised and very corporate in its aesthetic, I think. And when you're talking about communities and, you know, people as individuals, if you go into a space like that that isn't set up for you, it can become it can feel very toxic, and it can feel very, you can feel very othered. Because it's just, it doesn't have that.
It doesn't welcome you.
It doesn't feel very welcoming. And it's interesting because Pride is the day before UK Black Pride. And if you go to both, you can really feel the difference.
Night and day. Absolutely.
It's night and day. And I think UK Black Pride is, you know, it's much smaller. There's much more of a community feel to it. They celebrate diversity. You've got grassroots communities, selling their, the things on their stalls,
Families,
and it just families,
wheelchair users.
It's inviting.
It's a lot, yeah.
Yeah, and
awesome.
I just feel like I'm home, as I said before.
Yeah.
I can see people that look like me, and we understand our own experiences.
I must say I've never been to Pride. Well, once or twice, but I think
Which
I think
Pride? The main Pride?
Either one of them.
Really?
I
Okay,
think,
we need
well,
to change
I
that.
went to the first.
Post-corona.
Yeah, you need to come with me.
I went to the first one.
Absolutely.
I went to the main Pride,
Yeah.
and I didn't like it. And so
Yeah.
you get it, but
It's very
I might
different,
like
yeah.
this one.
You will like the.
By the sounds of it.
You'd love it. It's
You
so
will.
amazing.
I go with
Yeah.
my crew. We take a cooler of jollof rice.
Oh, wow.
The last
Okay.
Pride, my
You've
godson was
said it.
there. You
You've
have
said
to
it.
come.
You've
There'll be
said it.
proper, and it's Nigerian jollof, not Ghana jollof. So we have like a crew picnic baskets, mats, and it's a bit. We have 20, 30 people just
It's a
Yeah.
vibe.
turning up. It is a vibe. The
Yeah.
You mentioned
music,
food, and that's not coming.
and the banana cakes
Yeah,
and the
okay.
cookies, yes. And you mentioned African names earlier. So I'm also obviously of Nigerian heritage. My full name's Nzube Chukwu Chidiebele Ufodike. And I remember
Okay.
growing up, I asked my father, like, how come me and my brothers, none of us have English names? And he said back then to us that, well, ask your English friends why none of them have Igbo names. And I'm like, okay, that's a good point.
That's a good
So
point.
I had no choice but to adopt and accept my Igbo name from the start. And when people, I got a bit cheeky, like in my teens, when people say, oh, is there a short form for your name? I'm like, yep, don't call it. It's Nzube or nothing at all. So with African names, in your experience, how has that sort of played out for you? You use the name Bakari now sometimes. And
Well, I use it for short, Bucky.
Bucky, okay.
Yeah, but you can hear the bit of slightly.
And is that from Sierra Leone or
yes,
from?
yes,
Okay,
exactly.
nice.
Well, it's actually an Arabic name, and it's pronounced Buhari.
Ah.
Yeah, but
We're not going to call you Boo Boo though.
That's off air.
yeah. I mean, because people couldn't pronounce it. There was lots of
Yeah.
different names calling Buki, Bucky,
Yeah.
Bakri, and if you pronounce names wrongly
Yeah.
in different
It means something else.
something totally different.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
intonation matters.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have any African names, Emma?
I don't know, but I know.
I have to give you one now.
I'll leave that up to you. No, but in my experience, names, that's something I talk about a lot when I'm delivering training. A lot of cultural names are rooted in, they mean something, as you said. And when people change people's names because they can't say it or they're too lazy, it's problematic. Someone shortening your name because it's easier for them to say just erases your identity, your experience, where you're from. And people don't really understand that names are rooted in lots of cultural history.
I see.
So
I guess it's part of the education of intersectionality.
absolutely,
isn't it?
yeah.
I can see that now.
Yeah.
We
Indeed.
shouldn't be calling someone John just because it's easy for us to say if their name isn't John, or giving people nicknames
I agree
because
with you.
you can't say it. It's but it happens a lot.
It does. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you so much, Emma and Simon. And to our audience that
Thank you
have
very
been
much.
with us on the show, thank you. We'll be back next week on another episode of Stay Storiez. Don't go away.